For a self-managed superannuation fund, or SMSF, to be compliant, it has to be classified as an Australian super fund. Joining me in the studio today is David Sherlow from Macquarie Advisor Services to talk about what it takes to be Australian. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Darren.
So what are the tests that need to be satisfied for a fund to be considered Australian?
Well, there are three tests. The first one is that the fund was either established in Australia or that any one of its current assets is in Australia. So that's generally a pretty straightforward test to meet. The second test is that its central management and control must be in Australia. And that throws up two particular questions. What is central management and control? And where does that occur at any point in time? And the third test is the active member test. And to meet the active member test, the fund either needs to have no active members, or if it does have active members, at least 50% of the assets backing their benefits need to be the assets of Australian active members. So it's particularly important that you have that balance right.
And what constitutes an active member?
That's someone who is either making contributions to the fund or someone for whom contributions are being made for the fund. And to drill down a little bit further on that, you're a contributor if you're actually making contributions and you have the intention to make contributions. So, for example, if you're a regular contributor, then you're regarded as an active member both at the time the instant you're making the contributions, and also the time in between those contributions.
Do all three of these tests need to be satisfied at the same time?
The answer to that one is simply yes.
So, David, what are the consequences if SMSF trustees fail these requirements at any time?
The consequences dire. The tax penalties for a fund losing its Australian compliance status, which occurs if you lose that Australian residency status, that all of the market value of the assets, less the undeducted contributions made before July 2007 and less the untaxed contributions made since July 2007, are taxed at the top marginal rate. So that's a big tax hit straight off. And then to the extent that the fund remains non-complying in later years, all its assessable income is taxed at the top marginal rate as well. So it's something that well and truly needs to be avoided.
David, do they have to be satisfied at all times throughout the year?
For the purposes of the Income Tax Assessment Act, the Tax Office has clearly recognised that satisfying the three tests at any point in time during the course of an income year is sufficient. But for practical purposes, that doesn't really help you, because the Tax Office has formed the view that in order to keep your compliance status under SIS, under the Superannuation Industry Supervision Act, you need to have met those tests at all times during the year.
Well, what happens if an SMSF trustee goes overseas?
Well, if the trustee goes overseas, you've got issues about the need to meet the definition of a self-managed fund. You've got to bear in mind the fact that broadly every member needs to be a trustee, or in the case of a company trustee, a trustee director, and broadly vice versa. So if a trustee heads offshore, you've got issues meeting that definition if the trustees stay the same, and it throws up issues about whether or not you're going to continue to meet the central management and control test and the active member test.
And David, if they do go overseas, then what's the best course of action they can take?
Well, if you've got a majority of trustees or trustees directors staying on Australian shores, you may not have a problem. So you need to assess whether there is going to be a problem under those tests. If it does look as if there will be a problem under those tests, then one course of action is to replace the trusteeship with a commercial trustee, and for the fund to become a small APRA fund. But that carries with it a loss of control and expenses and so on. The other course of action is to remove the offshore trustees and replace them with someone who holds an enduring power of attorney provided to them by that person.
Thanks very much for your time today, David.
Thanks very much.